Hello, everyone. I invite you all to head to your seats, but I think most of you are already there, which is good to see. Thank you all for coming today to our 6th annual summit at the Western Regional Enterprise Network. I'll be your MC for the day. My name is Evan Nemeth. I'm our Economic Development Officer with a research lead. I just quickly like to point out some housekeeping stuff. Coffee is in the back corner there, as well as water and I believe tea. And bathrooms are to my right, your left. Photos today will be taken by our new recruit, Andrew Melanson, maybe some other people as well. And just to let you all know, we're all streaming live through the camera above there. It's pointing this way, and we'll all be on Facebook Live. So if anyone would like to tune in at a later time, you'll be able to see that. If you want to share it with someone, it's all available on our Facebook page. And our intention is also to upload that to YouTube at a future date. And when that happens, we'll let you know this social media. For those of you that are in the flesh today, we're going to have 2 door prizes after our keynote speaker today and before lunch. So please stick around for that. Everyone should have an agenda in front of them, and I believe that it has some space within it for you to put in any notes that you'd like to take throughout the day. You should all have pens in front of you as well. There is an open Wi-Fi channel. I forget what it's called off the top of my head, but it's, I think, MFD Guest. And if any of you require data, please log in there because we'd like you to participate in a program that we have up on our screen here. So there's a link there, www.menti.com, MENTI. And there's a code that would ask you to put in. It's 235938. And I'm going to repeat that for anybody that's on Facebook who can't see the screen. 235938. And when you punch in that code, there'll be a question that comes up. Presently, it's going to be the one that's listed on the screen. What type of organization are you with? Public, private, or other? So please check that out. We're going to be using Menti throughout the day. So great to have you on there early and get a test run. To start things off, I invite our CEO, Angélique LeBlanc, to come up. She's going to give a brief presentation and introduce the topic of the day. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Bienvenue à Metegan. And it's nice to see so many of you here this morning on this beautiful day. And it was quite a hub here last night because it was one of the locations for the election. So they just wrapped up, I think, at around 11:30 this morning. So we're glad to be here. And I wanted to kick off just by telling you a little bit about our organization. We see some new faces in the room, and maybe give you just a brief update as to what we're doing and give some context around what we're doing here today. So the Western Regional Enterprise Network is a municipal corporation. We're funded by both provincial government and the participating municipalities to our organization. So that means that the municipal units from Barrington to Digby. And we work in regional economic development. We work very closely with private sector clients, navigating them through various programs and resources. And we also work very closely, particularly with our municipal partners, and we work on some broader issues that impact economic development in our region and ultimately impact the local business environment. Internet, for example, would be one of the things that we work on very closely with our municipal partners. So some of our programs, our core program is our Business Now program, and that's our navigational program, wayfinding program. It's to help connect private sector clients to supports in the region and in the province, and sometimes federally as well. So Andrew Melanson who is our photographer / Business Now lead you just met. We also have our Connector program, which is an intentional networking program. And I think a lot of you in the room today know Brenda LaGrandeur, whose primary, I guess, purpose with the Western Run is to lead the Connector program. Is Brenda in the room? There you go. I knew you were wearing red. So Brenda also works closely with Succession. Brenda works very closely with Succession clients as well. Good morning, Dolores. I hope you're okay. It's good to see you. I'm glad you are okay. And we also work in immigration. We have a new immigration lead who's starting tomorrow. His name is Rob Stevenson, so we're happy to welcome him to our team. And there we're really helping employers connect to an international workforce. And we're launching a new program. We have a session day after tomorrow, I believe. Our continuous improvement session will be a bit of an official launch of that program, and that's really designed to help businesses identify efficiencies for a bottom line impact. And the reason we're here today, our newest program, our Succession program. So just very briefly, if we could talk high level, and we're going to dig down, we're going to really unpack this today, but what is Succession? So Succession is a plan outlining the logistics of a transition in order to ensure a smooth handover. So it can be a very complex process, as I'm sure many of you are well aware. And like anything that's overly complex, it's better to tackle it one component at a time or one step at a time. So factors that need to be considered: determining the value of the business, settling tax and debt obligations, actually choosing successors, and then working with those successors, and communicating the plan to everyone that is relevant to. And why is it necessary? Most entrepreneurs that we work with, we know that you all have one thing in common. You've really dedicated your life to your business, to working on building that business, and it's perfectly natural to want to see that business continue to thrive and to grow. So there's often a commitment that's felt to a strong commitment towards staff, towards customers, partners, even suppliers, and of course in communities the size of ours, for the community as well. So without having a clear succession plan, the chances of a smooth transition can go down quite drastically. So we want to talk about planning today. So we don't want to see businesses just shutter their doors. It's unfortunate for everyone involved, and of course a waste of resources, and it does impact the livelihood of many people. So why succession matters to the Western Run from a regional perspective? Of course, retention of businesses that are critical to our local supply chains. So we know that everything is linked so intricately. If you think about fisheries, for example, there are so many businesses that support directly, indirectly support that industry, and they are all essential to make sure that those operations continue to function optimally. And also the service industry that supports the community. These businesses are key. The retention of wealth in our community. So like I said, we just don't want the doors to close. We want to see the business owner retire, and we want to see some new wealth injected into the community as well. Succession really is a turnkey business opportunity, and that really connects with the youth piece as well. So for people who are looking to maybe start working in a business from day one rather than build from the ground up, this is a tremendous opportunity. There's room for some new innovation and some new growth. So we see now we have resources in our province and in our region like Ignite Labs, and we see some of the young talent in Ignite Labs. So it's bringing some of that young talent in as well, and plugging into that business and taking it to different places as well. Interprovincial migration. Through our Connector program, we often connect with individuals who are coming in from all across Canada. And I think the lure to Nova Scotia really is that pace, the lifestyle that we have here, the proximity to nature, The real estate prices are a big draw as well, so that's very attractive for interprovincial migration. And of course, international immigration opportunities. So I mentioned we work in immigration. There are many individuals who would be very interested in purchasing businesses, but they need to know that they're for sale. They need to know that they are there. So all this matters to our region in terms of, at the end of the day, maintaining and growing our population. So at the Western Ren, what are we doing about all this? Our first step is a partnership. It's a project, but it is a project that we have had funded by Global Affairs Canada and the Nova Scotia Community College. And it's a partnership with an existing company called successionmatching.com. And what it does is it offers access to a limited, for the project duration, let's call it a pilot project. I think we like to call most of our projects pilot projects, so you can really work out the kinks and then build it into something that's a bit more core later on. Offers access to a limited numbers of buyers and sellers to online succession transition resources. So when they're ready, there's also an opportunity for businesses to be listed on this online platform where they're ultimately matched with a potential buyer or investor. So some of the benefits in participating in this program, it's really a commission-free way to sell a business. If a business is listed with a realtor, it offers another platform in addition to that existing listing. There's also customizable privacy settings. So we're very happy with the turnout here in the room today. But one of the reasons why we did want to do the Facebook live stream is because we know that many businesses may be for sale. Business owners are thinking about selling, but they don't necessarily want everyone to know about it. So these privacy settings, up to you. You control who sees your information as either a buyer or a seller. And the program also offers one-on-one help for all kinds of successions. So that includes family transitions, management buyouts, and third-party sales. And of course, through Brenda, who's leading the program, and our close partnership with successionmatching.com, we actively support clients throughout this process. What we're learning from this program is, firstly, no two cases are alike. Every single one is very unique to you, unique to the business. They all require careful thoughts and planning. The more we can educate the business community in our region about the process and connect you to the supports, to the experts, to the people who have been through the process, the better. And that really is the purpose of our summit today. And we've also learned that it does take that team. So they're out there. And I think everybody who does own a business, you already have your trusted team of advisors, your network. And some of them are navigators, professionals, but also your family members, which are important in this process as well, who I'm sure are of great support. So these are all relationships that are critical to succession and to the success in helping you get the most value out of your business as you exit. So it does take that village, which I think most of you are here in the room today, so I won't keep you any further. I'm anxious to get going, and I look forward to some of the conversations that are going to take place today. So everybody, welcome, and thank you.
Thank you, Angélique, for that update on what's on the go with our organization and today. If everybody could please pop out their smartphone or electronic device, we have another question up empty right now, and I'll give you all a moment to respond to that. I believe you should still be logged in the first time. You can see the results change in real time there on the screen, the number of people who responded. There's even a section there for watching online for anyone who has 2 devices handy. All right, thank you all very much. I'd now like to invite Brenda LaGrandeur up to this stage. She is our Connector Program lead, and she will be running the first panel today. Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. I would like to first tell you a bit about the format that we're going to go through this morning. We're inviting 3 panelists who are going to, the CEO often uses this expression when you can kind of take a peek behind the curtain, who are going to share their stories of succession. There are 3 very different stories, but they actually have some common threads. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, either through the Mentimeter, or if there is time towards the end, we will actually hand around the mic. So I would like to introduce or ask to come up to the front, Katie Goodwin, Warner Comeau, and Dave Arenburg. Their short bios are in your program today. They're sitting far from me. I don't know what that means. As Angélique pointed out, there are many reasons why succession is important. These 3 stories will outline exactly the different types of experiences that business owners go through and why this is such an important process for our region. For this panel, what we're going to do is we're going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves, but introduce themselves through their story of succession. And from that, we'll ask some follow-up questions. So if we wanted to start, we can start with Warner.
This is working? Sure. I don't know if it's easy to start or easier to finish, but good morning, everyone. I was an insurance broker for approximately 30 years, and in my career as an insurance broker, we started with 1 office in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, and over time we expanded that to 5 locations throughout Nova Scotia, and at the time I sold my interest, we were rebranding the company and beginning expansion into New Brunswick. How did we get there? And did we learn anything along the way? And why am I here now talking about succession? Probably good questions. In the initial office in Yarmouth, we had 2 working partners and 3 silent partners in the business. We had a shareholders agreement in place that covered the process should the shareholder wish to sell, and giving first rights of refusal to the other shareholders, including a formula for valuation of the shares. We utilized this agreement in buying out the silent partners. This streamlined the operation and aligned the interests of the 2 remaining shareholders. After this, we turned our attention to expansion. We recognized 2 paths to growth: organic growth and growth by acquisition. Over the period of 2 decades, we purchased approximately 10 other brokers, either by share purchase or asset purchase. The purchase brokerages were either folded into our existing operations, or we used them to establish operations in adjacent communities, always looking for key staff and bringing our operational processes and standards to the new locations. The previous owners either retired or moved on to other occupations, either immediately or after a transition period. Early on, in partnership with another brokerage, we started to broker a brokerage from scratch in Amherst, giving us 2 regional hubs to operate from. The shareholders agreement we put in place at the formation of this operation was used in the process of buying out the Amherst partner. A few things that we learned over this process were the importance of shareholders' agreements to streamline the process in the event of any one shareholder wishing to sell, thereby protecting the position of the remaining shareholders. Watch for key staff and secure their employment to ensure continuity of any operation you buy. Utilize a memorandum of understanding to spell out the major details of the purchase agreement signed by both the buyer and the seller. As a purchaser and a seller, make sure you have a team of accounting, legal, and financial advisors that you can turn to for assistance. If the former owner should be staying on for a transition period, make sure their duties are clearly spelled out and the transition period be kept as short as possible. Also put in place non-compete and non-piracy agreements with them to protect your investment. It's important to note that not all of our attempts to purchase met with success. Several fell apart either early on during negotiations or during the due diligence stages. Lessons that we learned in failure, probably more important than the ones in success. Do your due diligence, get at least 3 years financials and review them for business trends and issues. Do not be afraid to walk away from a deal. There's always going to be other opportunities down the road. A good deal is fair to all parties. Do not jeopardize your financial well-being by overpaying. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Absorb your last deal before moving on to the next deal. Have escape clauses in your memorandum of understanding in event of adverse findings during the due diligence, so you have a way out. Succession of our own operation was also a priority, and this is why I'm here today, probably. Our internal plan was set up where through various steps, my business partner's son and my son would ultimately be the next generation owners. However, my son's interests were elsewhere, and as a result, I ended up selling earlier than planned to my partner's son. What I learned here, make sure you discuss the future of the business with your children so you know where their interests lie and if they see their future in your business. Build some flexibility in your succession plan to allow for opportunities you didn't anticipate. The time to start thinking about succession of your business is the day you start your business. Thank you.
Thank you, Werner. Just before we go on to Katie, as you can see, you can actually ask your questions right on your Mentimeter on your app. The questions will come up at the end of this 3 introductions and session. What we'll do is you'll have an opportunity to vote on the questions that you would like to have answered. That potentially can be all of them, but we do recommend that you ask away any questions that you are interested in. Okay, we'll move on to Katie Goodwin. Thank you.
Hello. I'm not used to using a microphone, so let me know if I need to adjust it. My name's Katie Goodwin. I'm the current owner of Dan's Ice Cream Shop in Barrington Passage. I've owned it for about 2.5 years. Purchasing that business was a career change for me. I was living and working in Alberta, Fort McMurray specifically, as a mining engineer. My husband and I had been looking for a couple years for an opportunity that would let us move back to Nova Scotia to continue raising our family here, close to extended family. We were looking in a key area, so in the Woods Harbor Barrington region, and one of the key points in my story is that the business I purchased came up for sale. It would not have occurred to me to approach a business that was not advertised for sale. Maybe these two are getting too close together. They're starting to hum. So in our preparations for today, that was something we spoke about as being important. The business was advertised for sale. Another interesting piece of information that came out of reflection was that the time that it took to purchase the business, I first made contact in November 2016, and I didn't officially purchase the business until late March 2017. So it took, I'd say, 4 or 5 months, and in my opinion, I think that was kind of an accelerated time frame. A lot of things went well and smoothly for us to be able to start and finish the process in that time. Some of the things that Warner spoke about applied in my case as well. We didn't use a memorandum of understanding as you cited, but we had agreements with the previous owner to train me and stay over, and we specified details, and I think you spoke to that a little bit about making sure that that was clear. I used a team of individuals in Alberta and in Nova Scotia to help me assess the business, assess my personal finances, assess how I could fund the purchase, whether it was the right fit for me. I used other people to help me understand whether this career change would suit me. All those things combined led me down a path where I did decide to purchase and move my family, and it's been a success from my point of view. Any questions at this point, or should we get to them later?
We can have a look. Actually, I think we'll do the 3 stories first, and then we'll get to questions if that's okay.
Okay,
So, Dave?
I'll end it there. Did you want this one? That one's good.
I'll pass that one up then. Thanks very much. I'm David Arenburg, and my wife and I have owned did own the Tim Hortons franchises in this end for almost 31 years. I believe the story of succession often is best started so that you understand my perspective on how we began, and then you'll see through the lens that I'm talking through. Back in 1985-86, my wife and I were living in New Brunswick. We were first in Fredericton and then in St. John. I was an executive or an advertising manager with Atlantic Television. My wife was trained as a teacher, but she was working for the federal government. Probably our next step, because I was with the Chum Group, would have been off to Toronto. At that point, we were about to start a family. So we had some deep discussions about where we wanted to be, where our ties were, how we envisioned our next family step. At that point, we were looking around, and we really wanted to be in small-town Nova Scotia, because that's how we both grew up. My wife was from Yarmouth. I had family ties in Bridgewater. Around that time, we were looking around at different things, and believe it or not, Tim Hortons at the time was a fairly small entity. I think there were not a whole lot more than a couple hundred franchises at the time. Through various connections and some persistence and letters, I got to meet Ron Joyce's brother, Bill Joyce, who did the development at the time, and in turn met Ron Joyce. And that's how, there's lots of stories around that, but that's how we got into the business for the first franchise. There's a few starts and stops, but at that point, all we ever really envisioned was one Tim Hortons in Yarmouth. That was going to be fine. We were going to start our family. We actually moved with a 3-month baby while I went off to training. Fast forward about 31 years later, and that's when we sold the company. At that point, it was 5 Tims, and there was 1 Wendy's. We had, at times, close to a couple hundred employees, but approximately about 175. We never envisioned it would grow to that size and that depth. But really, the deepness of succession began at about year 20 of that, or 10 years before selling, although we did do many steps early on. From the outset, when we bought the business, we spent time with our accountant, and the accountant wasn't just a number cruncher. He's somebody who remained close to today. There were lots of important questions pertaining around finance, market size, and each and every time we took a growth opportunity, a new restaurant, a new growth, we spent time with the accountant in detail, not just about the financial aspects, but about all kinds of things about how we were going to manage the particular geography, how we were going to manage the management group. That was critical. So again, back to 20 years later, if I can condense everything down. The reason why that was an important period is my wife and I were reaching the age of around 50 at that point. We were seeing retirement on the horizon, but also equally important, our children were around the 20-year age. They were successful in their own right at university. One's a pharmacist, and the other one is actually a CPA CA. So we needed to start to have some hard discussions regarding what succession was. So our succession road at that point, we did several things. One, we looked outward. We watched other people, some within our industry, make many mistakes, some that created enabling of family members, some that were strategic in their planning. We also studied a bunch of other businesses, some friends that have sold their business, some friends that succeeded on. And then we engaged some professionals. One I remember was really good. Again, he was an accountant, but he was more of a philosopher. One of the questions he gave us that resonated for years after, the gentleman's name was Joel Hunter. He said, David, you're going to start to think about this. I want you to think about this question if you sell to your family. And that is, what do your family dinners on Sunday night look like now? And what will they feel like 5 years from now when you sell to your family? How will you react? Can you back out of the business? How will they feel? And that's an important relationship. That was a good question, I thought. Similarly, we went to many seminars. The bank put some on. We heard about all kinds of family succession discussions. We engaged our children in the discussions throughout. And I've never believed that a family member had a blue-blooded right to a business, because really the business is about the brand and the commitment to the community. It's about the commitment to the employees and growing the business. Our children have been fortunate enough, I say they take after their mother, they're very bright, and they can stand on their own, but we talked to them about whether or not they had the passion or the fire in the belly to be in the business. One of them was engaged in it in times, but we entered into those conversations that really they were engaged in, and we made a joint decision that we could support them in their own interests rather than they carry on in succession. At the same time, when I was discussing some succession, I realized that my thoughts or our process fell into three separate legs of decision making. And these three legs, I call them the 3 M's, and I also describe them often as a 3-legged stool, meaning the succession will not go forward unless all 3 components are there. So very briefly, if I can, here are the 3 in sort of kind of a high overview. The 3 M's are the following: money, mindset, and mechanism. The first one, money, to be honest, is easy. When I say easy, maybe not the money, but it's a very much an objective decision. You need to decide what lifestyle you're going to evolve to. Even perhaps somebody like Katie who's coming in, it's going to be a change for her. So what is important for you? What do you need for that lifestyle? There are all kinds of discussions out there with financial people. There's even a book by Lee Eisenberg called The Number. You can go to that. And there are all kinds of information. But generally, that's a decision you need to come to yourself. That's the most black and white one. The second one, mindset. That's one of the most difficult. And there's all kinds of subcomponents of that. For example, the mindset is, am I ready to retire? What am I going to do? What role do my children play? If I stay in the business, what's my relationship? Those are the sorts of questions you have to have with yourself, but you should also engage with other people and find out what was successful for them. The mindset one has all kinds of subcomponents to it as well. The third one, mechanism, is really how the deal goes ahead. And again, there is a myriad of all kinds of variables there. Accountants know all kinds of options, from share sales to asset sales, to vendor financing. Those are the hard ends. But there's also, in the case of our own experience, we had a problem. It was well known for decades that Tim Hortons had a succession flaw. The formula for selling the franchises wasn't like a lot of other franchises that were well known. You can go on the web and look at McDonald's and see how they value their business. You can go on and see how most of the other ones are times EBITDA. Tim's had a strange rule and a strange component that essentially most accountants would say, listen, you got to ride this out to the sunset because it's not worth it to sell. And that was known for years. With that, I ended up focusing my attention on the mechanism piece, and luckily, through one of the new acquisitors and a guy who was in finance at the company, he had, and I can elaborate on that story later, he actually had an appetite for change, and we were able to change that. And I was involved in that process. So when that happened, there were several interested parties, and we were able to trigger that, and it was a good experience. But until that third leg, the mechanism was solved, it was a no-go. And it could have been just as easily not finding a buyer. So with that, we were able to trigger the succession, and it was a good experience. Some key learnings, just briefly at the end. One, absolutely invest in professional advice from day one. Our relationship with our accountant and accounting professionals, even over and beyond the numbers, has been absolutely critical every step of the road. I usually beat up accountants and lawyers, but since our accountant isn't in the room, I can say something nice to him, I guess. There were times during reorganization when we created structures and companies that I used to joke and say, geez, I think this is just helping your cash flow. I don't know why the hell we're doing this. But years later, thank God it happened, and he had the vision to say, someday you're going to want to unlock the value. Some other things are to expand your knowledge by reading books. After we really came to the decision about not having family succession, I went to a seminar. I think Warner was there too. This guy put it on called Every Family's Business. And we walked out that night, and my wife and I kind of said, you know what, we answered all the boxes. We're happy with what we did because every suggestion he made was there. But it would have been valuable. We also went to some other seminars, and I said read a fair amount of books and talked to lots of people. That was very helpful. Business isn't a right. Family members should be engaged in the discussion, and sometimes you have to have those tough love conversations. I'm pleased to say that our daughters were fully engaged in the process, fully discussed in it, and we all celebrated when the sale took place, and that was a good thing. And I guess the last thing I'll underscore are those, it helped me focus, those 3 M's, money, mindset, and mechanism. If you think in those, you may be able to get to making things work. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see that. I think what we'll do, since the questions are coming behind your head where you can't see them, I will go through some of those. Some of them are addressed specifically to one speaker. The one that's there now, Dave, would you be able to tell us if you sold the stores individually or if they sold as a complete package?
So, very good question. One of the things that we considered in the mechanism was dividing up the restaurants. That was an option. There was an appetite or an interest from a couple of people. But we also spent time, and there was an individual that we sold it, the whole group to. So we sold the whole group. And it was advantageous for us, and it was better for the staff, and for various reasons that we did that.
Great. Warner, I'll ask you this question that's come from the audience. You mentioned that there was a family connection, but there were also other employees in the business. Could you speak to whether the employees worried about the sale and the possibility of having new owners? Did you lose any employees during the transition?
We're working now? Our employees were used to dealing with this succession question because of the years that we spent buying various businesses. They were used to seeing that type of thing happen. So no, we didn't lose any employees when I sold my shares because there really wasn't that much change in the management of the company, because the person I sold to was my partner's son, and he'd been working for us for approximately 10 years at the time. And I can enlarge a bit on what Dave said. He talked about having the fire in the belly and the desire to be in the business. I mentioned that my son had no interest in being in the business. And that was through several conversations with him. I realized he had no desire to be an insurance broker or work with me in any way. He wanted to do things on his own. My partner's son, from probably age 14, wanted to be an insurance broker, wanted to work with his father. Through no influence by his father, he just wanted to do that. So when he came to me, I knew that was the right thing to do, to sell to him. And it was right for him, it was right for his father, his family, and it was right for my family and for my son.
Great. Katie, I want to ask you a little bit. You mentioned that you were an engineer. That's your profession, and that's what you did before you moved and bought your business. And there was a transition period between you and the person that you bought from. So I believe that there was actually, for a period of time, both of you working the business. Was there any issue with that transition from the employee's point of view of having the old boss and the new boss on site?
There was certainly potential for it, and it was something that the two of us spoke about, like the person I was purchasing from and myself. And I think it comes down to individual personalities. He was very good about, if people reverted to him for questions, he'd stop and he'd say, Katie, this person's asking this question, you know, what should we do, and that sort of thing. So it comes down to individuals in that case. I didn't view it as a problem. It was an opportunity to have him there. So we were actually not very far apart at any given time, probably just by a couple of steps. So
Fantastic.
So proximity helped as well.
Great. There is actually a question on there for you, Katie. Was yours a share sale or an asset sale?
It was an asset sale.
Okay. So, a question for you, David. Even though you've given us a lot of information, you've really opened up the covered the curtains.
I mean, I talk too much?
No, not at all. Never, never, never.
Sorry.
You did have a very, very large workforce, and I know that the workforce piece in this region, keeping key people, is basically something that many organizations strive to do, even getting their full complement. With the employees, I believe you said 175 to 200 employees at the time. Was that something that was key in the negotiations for the sale?
Are you asking what? Just phrase your question again a little bit differently.
Was part of the negotiation or part of actually the sale process to ensure that your key employees stayed with the business?
Well, I couldn't really ensure that they stayed with the business, but I'm pleased to say that one of the perspectives that I had trying to figure out who was going to buy and the interested party that was interested was I actually sold to, and I saw this happen in another business, totally unrelated business. It was a fairly large business. The gentleman sold his business to somebody in an industry, but it was smaller. And as a result, the smaller guy, or the guy that we'll call on the way up the ladder, he had an appetite to keep all the key managers, the key strategic team. Often, or you hear, that if you sell to the big guy, somebody who's, then you may lose some of the key management people, or they will lose it in an attempt to make it lean. Because I sold to an entity which was smaller, he probably more than doubled or tripled in size after he acquired our operation, but he had lots of learnings up until then. Because of that, he had an appetite for our management group. He had an appetite for the systems, and those people are actually still all, the key management team are still there today.
Fantastic. Katie, as you were looking to move home, would the succession matching service, do you think that would have helped you?
Most likely. The succession matching, the informal succession matching service that we used was word of mouth from family members and that sort of thing, and our own imaginations. And it spanned over a couple of years, us thinking about how do we move back to Nova Scotia? Does it look like us living in Halifax? Does it look like us living right in Barrington? And what are the possibilities within those options?
Yeah, that managing the Connector program, I know that those networks of family and friends, being your eyes on the ground, are truly, truly invaluable.
Certainly knowing that something formal exists, I would have reached out to that if I'd known it was there.
Yes. For Warner, how did you assess whether expansion was a proper fit and when it was stretching things too thin? Was there any problem with lack of good additional team members in the various locations?
That's a bit of a tough question. We recognized expansion as being a way for us to not only enrich ourselves financially, but to, I guess, enrich our lives, because neither my partner and I had the desire to sit at our desks all day for 35 years selling home insurance to people. Not that that's not a good thing to do, but it doesn't develop you as an individual. So we had the desire to build the business, build our skill set, and expand our knowledge and experiences so that we could develop ourselves professionally. And we wanted to have impact on our industry. And in order to do that, we had to expand. The second part of your question was about...
Sorry, it went away. It was on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
We had some issues in some of our purchases in retaining staff, And that actually is one of the instances where we met with failure in closing a deal. And it was actually two-pronged, because we were trying to close a deal, and none of the staff were willing to stay on, with the exception of one person who was the least experienced. Due to that and a few other things that we discovered during our due diligence in relation to some of the financials, we backed out of that deal. Unfortunately, at the same time as we were going through all of that, we had the potential of another larger deal that we would have preferred to have worked on, that we put aside because we already were working on one, and because we didn't feel we had the capacity to close both at the same time. As a result, we ended up losing both those deals.
Okay. The last, oh, sorry. So this is for you, Dave. Did you use a shot? Oh, I'm sorry. That would be to buy out your partners. That would be another Warner question. Did you use a shotgun clause to buy out your partners, or was it mutual?
I didn't buy out my partners. We didn't have a shotgun clause. We had a shareholders agreement where if one shareholder wanted to sell, the other shareholders had first right of refusal. That way you protect yourself so that your partner wouldn't sell to someone that you didn't want to do business with. We didn't usually use the shareholders agreement because my partner's son wasn't part of the shareholders agreement at the time, because he was not a shareholder. So with him coming in wanting to buy me, his father could have easily said, no, I'm going to buy Warner, because he would have had that right, but he didn't, because he wanted to work with his son and his son wanted to work with him. So we had a bit of a, I guess, an amalgamation of it. We had the shareholders agreement, but we didn't utilize it because we both looked at where we wanted to go, and it was actually part of our succession plan anyway, the only change being that my son was no longer going to be involved by his choice.
The project that we're working on, that I'm really fortunate to be able to work with local businesses, are at various stages of the process of succession. And most of the time, when I meet with businesses, they're interested in finding a buyer. That's where they're basically almost starting their planning process. Could you speak to a bit about when the important time is to start that plan for the succession?
As I indicated, I think personally that the time to start thinking about succession and developing succession of your business is when you start your business. You should always be thinking about various scenarios of what ifs. What if someone comes to you with more money than you ever thought would be offered for your business? What are you going to do then? Are you prepared to move on and do something else? What if you get sick? Do you have key personnel who can take over for you? Do you have a family member that can step in and help you along with the business? Will your business die because you got sick? What about your employees? Are they interested in moving along and moving up in the business? So all these things are important, and they all should be started at the very moment that you start your business, in my opinion.
From my perspective, I was on the receiving end of the succession question. It was apparent that there were several years of work that were preparing the business for sale. There was an environmental assessment done that would have really slowed down the deal if it hadn't been done in advance. There had been work with the accountant so that all the information was packaged up in a way that was easily shareable and readily available. So there was certainly, I think, a few years of work.
Sure, I certainly agree with everything that Katie and Warner said, and we too started very early. And it was an annual conversation with our accountant about, building value in the company and what ifs and that sort of thing. The other one which you touched on, which is, how do you find a buyer? About 15 years ago, we knew we probably wanted at some point sell the Wendy's. It was a separate entity. And sometimes you just kind of take advantage of a situation, and often that's a casual conversation with somebody. And in both cases, that's what it was. It happened to be franchisees, and you're having a beer with them and say, how's this going? You have the discussion. Yeah, if you ever think you want to let that one go, let me know. Oh, interesting. Well, why don't you think about the whole group someday when I'm old and gray? And then it goes off from there. And that's essentially how the conversations, networking, it can be often a casual conversation. The Wendy sale was much easier. It was because it didn't have that mechanism issue, but we had a memorandum of understanding. We went through it, and it was pretty seamless on that end. So.
Great. What about basically, there are many moving parts to all of this, and I'm sure that even though you're making it sound like it was pretty smooth for the three of you, there were some stress points, some pinch points. Would you be able to tell us if there's anything at this point that you would do differently through your transition? Lessons learned.
I'll jump in on that one. I would go back and I would speak to the service providers for the business just to get a better understanding of the equipment and the building and its status, because that's not something that's easily put to paper via an accountant or a lawyer. I did a walkthrough and we did a building inspection and all of that, but I would have probably hit the ground running a little faster if I'd spoken to, refrigeration people and the plumber and the electrician and that sort of thing.
About how the equipment worked or the value of the equipment?
Both, like the age of certain things, the certain things that would be coming up soon, that sort of information. I wouldn't have had to learn on the ground quite as much if I could have gathered it up front. I don't think it would have changed my perspective on purchasing the business, but it would have been informative to have more information up front.
Of course.
Do you have some lessons learned?
No, only to probably underscore what I said. I really, really, really enjoy listening to other people and their succession stories. I took great value out of those things. And some of them were, in some cases, some humorous stories. Like one of the ones that resonated for me, it was somebody from up this area. He was selling his agricultural business. And so we had dinner one night, and I said, so tell me, when did you come to the point? When did you come to the point when you knew you wanted to sell? It was in the mindset question. And he kind of chuckled, and he said, he said, you watch American Idol? And I said, well, I don't like to admit to it, but on occasion I have. And he said, well, I watched it the night that Simon Cowell decided he was going to retire. He said, and the guy, he looked out and he said, somebody said, well, why do you want to leave this show? It's successful. He said, well, in everybody's life, there's time to leave the party. He said, and that resonated for me. And it made me also think about, the politicians that stay too long. The ones we often respect, and I'll use Frank McKenna as an example, he knew when to get in and he knew when to get out. And so that resonated for this guy, and that stuck with me as well. But there were numerous stories I had, and I would always ask these stupid questions to people who have gone through the process, and I usually took little gems out of it. So that's one example.
Great.
I don't think I really have any distinct lessons learned other than the fact that because we bought so many businesses, we developed a procedure over time and a checklist that we used when we were buying our businesses so that we ticked off the boxes and worked our way through that. But what I did learn through this process was, personally, the business was there for me to succeed, and it wasn't my child or my baby. My child is my child, my son. And it became clear to me that at some point in time I would want to sell. It might have been earlier than and I did sell probably 7 years earlier than I'd planned to, but I did that because the opportunity was right. I'd already accomplished everything that I had wanted to accomplish in business, and my son had expressed a desire to move on to other businesses and indicated that he would want my help in that, and I was more than willing to do that. If he didn't want to be in my business, I was more than willing to help him along his way so that he could become successful in his own right. So I learned that the business is a ways and a means for you to succeed. You're not there to serve your business is there to serve you.
Dave, How deeply were you involved in the management of each store? Did you edge away from this management style when you wanted to sell?
That's probably a question better asked to the staff than it is me. As any company grows, I mean, in the early days, I was like the Dunkin' Donuts guy. Friends used to make fun that when we had the one restaurant, we'd go out for dinner and I'd get the phone call and it was time to make the donuts. And that was very early and it was hands-on. But as you grow from, 1 to 5 locations or the Wendy's, you have to have a depth. So someone would say on occasion, Shelby, geez, we haven't seen you here in a long time. And I said, well, if I came every day to each restaurant, I'd only be here, for a little while. So you try to make touch points. So I'd like to think, I was never as hands-on as I would have liked to have been, that's for sure, because the more hands-on you can be, the better. But when I compared myself to my colleagues, and from what I hear, I think I was, giving what the job that had to be done, I think it was okay.
I'm just reading behind your heads again. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one, but would you say that the experts necessary for succession planning are readily available in our region? Or do you think it's actually an opportunity for adding to our workforce assets? Did you have to go outside of community to find, outside of the region to find those resources?
Since I have the mic, I'll answer that. I think you can go to your accountants and you can go to your lawyers, and if they don't have it, if they're good accountants or lawyers, they will access it or bring it in. And so I think it's that relationship that they will find and get for you, or your financiers. I think you just got to keep asking the questions. And I certainly was served. I had to invest in, I took a chance, and I went through Grant Thornton, and because we had this problem with the valuation and problem with the succession, it was a huge problem across Canada. Finally, I got frustrated, and I hired a tax accountant to work with me and to create a model, a test model. And that was hugely valuable. I invested the money, but he was a young tax accountant on the South Shore. It was really good. It was recommended through the local office, and it was brilliant what he did. And that got me in the door to work on the succession plan, which I can explain at another time.
Katie, you might want to speak to that, because you actually mentioned that you accessed resources when you were in Alberta, and also some that were here on the ground regionally.
Yeah, they were more for a purchase and sale. I don't know that it's specific to the succession side, but I would reach out to the same individuals decades down the road if that's when I start a formal succession kind of conversation. But certainly an accountant and a lawyer that you can speak with and understand, and they can align what they're going to do with what your needs are.
My experience is similar to Dave's. We built our network of advisors over years, and we trusted them and had confidence in their abilities. I feel there's a tremendous amount of talent in this area, and if they don't know the answer, they know where to go to get the answer, and they can point you in the right direction. I was fortunate in some of my dealings, I used the same person that Dave used for some tax advice. So it's there. You just need to develop your network over time and trust those people that you've worked with over the years that have helped make you successful.
Katie, I'm thinking you might have answered this, but did you use any consulting outside? Do you do any consulting outside of the business on your actual process? I'm assuming that's what the question meant.
Do I ask others for... I certainly don't provide consulting.
Okay.
I seek it. Put it that way.
I think that's what it was. I
because
think
I'm
somebody
so
was
fresh
interested
in a management and entrepreneurial role, and it's not what I had, 7 years of experience in or training in formally. Yes, I do seek expert advice.
Of course.
Brenda, I think the question was if you do engineering consulting.
Oh.
No, this is a full-time job. Yeah, you have to have a certain number of hours and active work. So I've put my engineering on a shelf. I've put my license in hibernation. Put it that way.
Dave, you spoke about a lot of seminars and workshops and that you attended. How did you find out about those? Were those through the franchise opportunities or?
No, I just kind of kept my ear to the ground. Well, one of the first ones was RBC put it on, and it was told a story about a family succession, and it was quite well done because one of the resonances there, or one of the messages that came out of that was sometimes the child that you think will succeed is not really the one. But there was testing and that was done. Plus, I also have a friend that he's a psychologist, but he handles successions for big companies, and he happened to be a friend that I on the side. So he and I would talk about things. So some of that consulting and his perspective was quite interesting. So there are things that come up from time to time, and they're out there just like today is, and you should kind of keep your ear to the ground.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that I'm hearing is people don't know really where to go for those resources. So I think it's important for us to start capturing that information as well and share with, well, a day like this, of course, is an excellent opportunity for anybody to learn about the process. There's a question here. Do you care to share how long it took for the entire transition? And might you share in broad terms how much the costs were to complete? Wow, that's a big question.
Got a bunch of votes. I'm being true to the voting.
Yeah. Maybe, well, Katie shared the length of
I
transition.
touched on our length, so it started in November and it finished at the end of March. But that didn't include all the work that the seller had done in the years prior, or me getting my mindset in the right place prior to that. And then just because the company was set up and the purchase went through on X date, there was trailing things like the training and the learning and how to actually operate this new business that I had. So certainly you can't say that it only took 5 months. There was work beforehand and work afterwards. I won't speak to the costs, but they were all worthwhile.
When it came to my selling my shares in the business, the process took approximately 6 months from the initial conversation with the purchaser and the final closing. And really the reason it took 6 months was because I was specific on when I wanted to close for tax purposes. As far as the personal costs, they were minimal as far as I was concerned in relation to the size of the deal that I made. Another part of the delay was probably the financing that needed to be put in place by the purchaser. So that sometimes takes some time. You have to be cognizant of it. So yeah, I think that answers the question. I'm not sure.
So, no, same question. Go ahead.
Time-wise, 6 months is probably a good number if everything is lined up. Our situation was kind of, as they say in some areas of Nova Scotia, arse backwards. We had a willing buyer, a willing seller, but we were held up on this mechanism issue. So once that was settled, we were one of the first, or the test models for it, because I was on this committee. So what was interesting was we had an approximation of where the price or the value was on it. But we didn't know it because there was a formula that was agreed on. So actually, until the day, it was like, I'm going to sell you this house. You agree to this formula, I agree to this formula until we know what it is, and then somebody does it. And so we were waiting for that. Plus we have, because we're dealing with a franchisor, we have to have acceptance down the road. So that takes quite a while until we got all those ducks in a row. And then we had to be on the lead end of a legal document. So it took a while, but it was just a matter of checking off the boxes. But it was an interesting process because the number was after the fact, although it was in a range.
Mm-hmm. You might want to hang on to the mic for this one. When it came to discussions with family, did you hire moderators or others to help you through those potential tough conversations? Multiple children could have different ideas or goals.
No, we didn't hire a moderator. Probably should at times. or they would suggest it. I like to believe we had pretty good open conversations, but they were centered around, lifestyle and change and passion for the business and what's the right thing for them and the right thing for us. But there was a couple of key messages afterwards. One was, I believed, and some of it has to do with, I'll say me, is that whether or not I could step away from the business and see them struggle or see them be challenged. And so I had to be honest with myself, too. And we kind of believed that if there was an opportunity that was their passion, I could see us supporting them in that, while at the same time, should it ever fail, feeling okay that don't worry about it, you can, restart, as opposed to enabling them in something that they might fail in that I felt that I pushed them towards or enabled them for. So that was an interesting question. They were fully active in the discussion. There wasn't any need for no moderator. On a funny note, the day that the deal was done, the whole family was around, and the lawyer we dealt with in head office, who I had a close relationship in developing this formula, I sent her the picture when the deal was done. It was the whole family having a glass of wine, toasting, and we were all on the same page. We had a grandchild that was only 3 months old, and she communicated the only way she knew how, which was out the back of her diaper in the photo. So the caption was, "The whole family's happy. Thank you for your support," and that was good.
Very good. I think we've gone through all the questions that we've gotten through the Mentimeter. No, we haven't. Sorry, Erica's. How did you come to an agreement on the value of the assets? How much of a role EBITDA?
Is the asker in the room? What is EBITDA? Does anybody up there know? I think we're all saying it. It was something the accountants educated me on. It was
Okay.
a way. These guys might know more about it. It was my first experience with it. Who would like to explain it?
Well, you were supposed to value the assets.
Oh, okay. I relied on the professional advice of the accountants. So, yeah.
My sale was based on a formula in relation to the revenue of the company, basically be so many times revenue, which was adjusted for earnings before interest, taxation, and amortization is what EBITDA means. So the formula was agreed upon by myself and the purchaser through a memorandum of understanding, as I mentioned before, and that was fine-tuned by the purchaser's accountant, who took into account all the various liabilities and assets of the company, so it was adjusted up and or down based on what was remaining in the company, which in my case was up.
Okay, we're coming to the end of our session, and since not everybody perhaps is as comfortable as some with questions on the Mentimeter, I just wanted to, if there was somebody that had a question that wanted to ask it, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll either bring a mic out to you, or if you're loud enough, you can. Mentimeter it is. Oh, then we will go through these. People are very comfortable here. Katie, are you looking to expand? The Palace de la Glace Molle is for sale, just saying.
No, I don't currently have any ambitions to expand, but it's something I sit down and think about what would have to change in my mindset to want to pursue that. And you might have something to add on that, because you said you didn't envision multiple locations and franchises, and I'm kind of at the onset, and I don't envision it, but I know it's a possibility.
You'll know when you feel that happens. You'll know when you're right, and if an opportunity comes up, if it doesn't, you'll spend time on it. So you'll know. If it may not be now, but it might be next year.
My family were fishermen, and my grandfather sold his lobster operation to my dad, and then my dad sold to a young man in our community, and they were both known as shore captains from that day on, because they would be at the wharf waiting to give their advice and find everything out. So the question from the audience is, for Warner and David, how have you adapted to retirement? Any regrets at all?
I adapted to retirement by getting involved in a few areas of volunteering that I couldn't do while I was a insurance broker. I became involved in municipal elections by supporting the current mayor of Yarmouth on their first election. If I'd done that as an insurance broker, I probably would have lost a tremendous amount of business because sometimes people mix up business with politics. I also have a economics degree, which I really didn't utilize over the 28 years that I was an insurance broker. So I made a conscious decision that I would probably run my own investments. So I spent 2 years learning how the stock market worked, or as much as I could learn how the stock market worked and how the investment industry worked, and just fired my stockbroker after 2 years and took over that role myself. I looked for other opportunities to become involved as a volunteer. I worked with the Regional Enterprise Network, as you know, and worked my way through chair in that organization. And now I'm sort of in a dry spell. I'm looking for more things to do. So I'm out there and available, I guess.
Wow, that's an offer.
I'm always looking for good supers. No.
I've had no shortage of things to do. Been very busy ever since. I too have been involved in various volunteer things, including the board of this and other boards. But early on, I also realized I've had other interests and passions that I've maintained throughout. One of those is my marine background, and so I've kept my licenses up. I even went to the UK and have a marine surveying certificate from Lloyd's. So from time to, do I make money at that? Probably no, but I get called out from time to time on those things, or I've always delivered yachts over the years, so there's some interest. But the more important piece is that we now have 3 grandchildren, very active on that end and quite happy, and we're kind of an exception to the rule. Both our daughters live in our town. A lot of people are away. Every so often I threaten that we're going to move to Calgary, but it's been very enjoyable, actually, and that's been good. Sometimes I say I need to go back to work to have some structure in my life because I'm not sure what it brings, but it's been good. Thank you.
Okay.
I think that most of the other questions have been answered, and some of them were quite granular. So if you have a specific question for one of the panelists, they will be here. You can talk to them through the break as well.
I just wanted to know if you had set up a family trust.
Yes.
We're getting down to the end now. One-word answers. I would like to very much thank the 3 of you for sharing the stories that you have. We have something to show our appreciation.
This is for Katie. Thank you very much.
I thank you all very much for using the technology. Thank you.
Thank you to Brenda and our panelists for that. That was an excellent discussion. I'd just like to let everyone know we're about to take a 30-minute break. If you're on Facebook Live, we're actually going to stop the feed and start it again as a part 2 later.